Hey, what's going on out there, people? Welcome to this new YouTube channel called Wildcard MTG, where I do deck techs on EDH decks. For this inaugural episode, we're going to be doing a deck tech on one of my new favorite commanders from Modern Horizons 3. That is going to be the Necrobloom. Now, before we get into it, I just want to let you all know this is not a budget deck. It is meant to be a semi-high powered but focused deck. Now, if you're looking for a more budget version, I do give some tips of how to budget the deck near the end of this video. Now, let's get into some of the pros of this deck. You know, the pros really are that overall the value of synergies between the landfall and life gain enablers, along with a bunch of massive token generation, really helps this deck stand out. Now, the cons, it can easily be taken out by more aggro and control strategies because the Necrobloom is quite slow. I mean, you can play it early as turn 4, start making planet tokens, but it doesn't really shine until about turn 7 when you have 7 different named lands on the battlefield. So now, let's talk about the commander. Necrobloom is a legendary plant creature with a mana cost of 1 generic, white, black, and green. And its ability says, Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, create a 0/1 green plant creature token. If you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead. Land cards in your graveyard have Dredge 2, and the reminder text says, you may return a land card from your graveyard to your hand and mill 2 cards instead of drawing a card. Now, how do we make the most of both of these abilities while maximizing token generation? Well, I've theory crafted and brewed this deck with a little bit of a life gain sub-theme while fully embracing the landfall ability in its text, as well as other cards that rely on that ability with token generation being the third sub-theme of the deck. Well, I'm sure a lot of people checking this out may be thinking that 3 different archetypes in the deck may be way too much. The way this deck is built synergizes all of them pretty equally. So real quick here, let's break down some percentages of the deck. If you look here, thanks to Moxfield, we have 24% white mana, 31% black mana, and 71% green mana, with 3% coming in at colorless. So overall, the composition of this deck is leaning heavily towards green. That's mostly because of our ramp and most of the creatures in the deck, which are also green. Now, if you look at our graph here showing the mana value of everything in the deck, we lean pretty heavily at about the 3 mana percentage, with 6 to 7 being the low end. We don't really go above 5, but there are a couple creatures that are 6 and 7 respectively. Now, this is a pretty even split almost in the mana, the 3 mana value between permanents and spells, whereas our 1-drops are all permanents for the most part, and 6-drops, same thing, just entirely a permanent. Now let's look at these 1-drops here. So for our 1-drops, we have 4 creatures, and according to Moxfield, we have a 98.28% chance of playing these on curve, which I agree with. You can play these 1-drops on curve every single game. And going into our 2-drop section here, we have Springheart Nantuko for the creature. Sorceries, we have about 5, and according to Moxfield, we have 92.53% chance of playing these on curve, and again, that is great. We're always going to have a 1 or 2 drop, to where we can even play multiples of these on turns sometimes. Now, the 3 drops is where everything's at. If you look at the creatures, we have 9 creatures that cost 3 mana. We have 5 sorceries, 3 instants, and our artifact is Crucible of Worlds, and our enchantment is Spelunking. And so that are the stats of the deck. Let's move on. So before we get into how the deck is built, let's go over some of the rules text on the Necrobloom to better understand the card. And taken from Scryfall, let's look at some of the rulings. If you control multiple lands with the same name, only one of those lands will count toward the 7 or more required to create a zombie. For example, if you control 4 lands named Forest, 2 named Plains, and 1 named Swamp, you control 3 lands with different names. If multiple lands enter the battlefield under your control, simultaneously all of those lands are counted. For example, if you sacrifice 7 lands while resolving Scapeshift and search your library for 7 lands with different names, you'll create 7 zombie tokens. If an effect puts a card into your hand without specifically using the word draw, you are not drawing a card, and Dredge can't replace this event. Dredge can replace any card draw, not just the one during your draw step. One card draw can't be replaced by multiple Dredge abilities. You can't attempt to use a Dredge ability if you don't have enough cards in your library. Once you've announced that you're applying a card's Dredge ability to replace a draw, players can't take any action until you've put that card into your hand and put the top cards of your library into your graveyard. If you are drawing multiple cards, each draw is performed one at a time. For example, if you're instructed to draw 2 cards and you replace the first draw with the Dredge ability, another card with a Dredge ability, including one that was put into your graveyard by the first Dredge ability, may be used to replace the second draw. So now let's look at the overall spread of cards we have in this deck. We're going to be utilizing 28 creatures, 14 sorceries, 9 instants, only 3 artifacts, 7 enchantments, and 38 lands. Now let's get into each section of those, starting with the creatures. Our creature lineup for this deck is Ancient Greenwarden, Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, Avenger of Zendikar, Braid's Arisen Nightmare, Chatterfang, Squirrel General, Courser of Krufix, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Essence Warden, Greensleeves Morrow Sorcerer, Hogak, Arisen Necropolis, Kambal, Profiteering Mayor, Kadama of the East Tree, Mirkwood Bats, Mondrak, Glory Dominus, Ocelot Pride, Raminyap Excavator, 6, Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, Springheart Nantuko, Thalia and the Gitrog Monster, the Gitrog Monster, the Gitrog Ravenous Ride, Tireless Provisioner, Titania Protector of Argoth, Titania Voice of Gaia, and Vorinclex. So, how do some of these creatures synergize with the deck? Well, we have a lot of 1-drops that care about creatures entering or that give us some kind of advantage with the token generation we will be doing. Cards like Soul Warden, Essence Warden, Ocelot Pride, and Guide of Souls are absolutely brutal 1-drop life gang that will put you ahead early in the game. There are also a few combos of creatures in the deck, but we'll get to that in a later section. So early plays that you can do if you manage to bestow Springheart Nantuko on any one of the creatures I just mentioned, it gets really out of control really quick. I always recommend bestowing it onto either one of the Soul Sisters or the Ocelot Pride itself. Having multiple Ocelot Prides is an automatic win con almost. Now, Avenger of Zendikar, Springheart Nantuko, Greensleeves Morrow Sorcerer, Tireless Provisioner, Courser of Krufix, and our Commander are all the creatures with the landfall keyword that we will be playing around. A little bit of strategy, it is best to drop Necrobloom as soon as you hit those 4 lands to really start that plant token generation. And even if Necrobloom eats removal, by the time you recast it, you should have enough lands that it should be online to start producing zombies the next time around. And with the Necrobloom's Dredge ability, we can mill 2 cards and get a land back if we need more landfall triggers. It helps with any missed land drop or if you just want to go get more cards into the graveyard. I did include Mondrak in this deck as a token doubler instead of the usual suspects like Doubling Season, Anointed Procession, etc. Those can be utilized and they are good additions to this deck if you feel that's the way you want to go with it. But I felt like it's a body that can utilize the tokens made to make itself indestructible. And since we're going to be getting so much life, paying that Phyrexian mana cost is nothing to us. Sure, it can still eat exile removal, but it's better than one of our 4 combo pieces getting destroyed. It's basically removal bait. People are going to see that Mondrak and try to hit it right off the bat. Now, creatures like Cabal, Profiteering Mayor, and Mirkwood Bats care about all the tokens we're going to be making and get us some more life gain and life drain for our opponents. The Titania cards serve as another way of token generation that really synergizes with how many lands we'll be sacrificing thanks to the fetch land, and other cards we'll be discussing in the instant and sorcery section of this. Titania, Protector of Argoth, makes 5/3 elementals while letting us get a land back from the graveyard. Titania, Voice of Gaia, gains us life for each land we sacrifice, and once we have enough lands in the yard along with Argoth being out, we get a huge payoff with the card melding into Titania Gaia Incarnate. Now we have other ways to get back cards or mill with 6. Her Retrace ability lets us pitch lands into our graveyard to recast cards that were destroyed or milled. This card has got me out of a pinch so many times by getting back creatures that were killed off, like Ocelot Pride, early in the game or after a board wipe. And if you have Titania out, while you're pitching those lands, you will gain life because, well, you're putting a land into your graveyard. Now, some of the bigger creatures in this deck, the top end of the mana curve here, you have Ancient Greenwarden, which doubles all of our triggers from our landfall or token creation if it's the cause of a land entering. And Vorinclex lets us search up for dual type lands that are forest-based, so really getting our colors worked out. And you know, Hogak, it's just a card that can be milled and then cast from our graveyard with incredible ease. And you know, it's an 8/8 trample. Why not? And so now let's get into the sorceries in the deck. So the sorcery package that we're running here is a lot of ramp. We have Cultivate, Diabolic Intent, Eerie Ultimatum, Farseek, Kodama's Reach, Life from the Loam, Nature's Lore, Scapeshift, Splendid Reclamation, Squirming Emergence, Sylvan Scrying, Victimize, Vindicate, and Worm Harvest. Now, like I mentioned, the sorcery package is a lot of ramp cards and tutors for combo pieces or win cons that we may need. Typical ramp like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach are here, but you have some more niche ramp cards or specific land tutors like Sylvan Scrying to really help find Field of the Dead or Glacial Chasm ASAP. Farseek and Nature's Lore really help smooth out our colors by getting duels and a triome. Now, Life from the Loam is a repeatable dredge enabler while also allowing for 3 lands from the graveyard to be put into your hand, which helps with 6's Retrace ability. Worm Harvest is another token generator. I mean, with the amount of lands we'll have in the graveyard at some point, it will typically make 5 to 6 bodies easily. And of course, one of our win cons, if we have enough stuff in the graveyard thanks to Dredge, you can just Eerie Ultimatum, get everything out, and your battlefield is huge. Scapeshift can also allow for a huge tempo swing if enough token generators and landfall abilities are also on the battlefield when it resolves. And now let's talk about the instants. The instants we're using in this deck are Anguish Unmaking, Assassin's Trophy, Crop Rotation, Death Sprout, Generous Gift, Heroic Intervention, Pile On, Swords to Plowshares, and Tear Asunder. Now, a lot of the instants are targeted removal of various problematic objects, with exiling being the main focus, because you want those problem cards gone for good. Exiling is always the way to go over destroying. I try to run as many exile effects as possible. Now, I think you're also looking at this package and this video and you're thinking, where are the board wipes? Well, personally for me and my play group, we have really come up with a philosophy that we don't really run board wipes anymore. You know, games need to end, and board wipes tend to drag out games by 30 plus minutes to an hour. And generally, I've noticed if a board wipe is played, it's mostly by the person who's behind to continue dragging out the game so they can get caught up. So for me personally, I rarely, if ever, put in board wipes unless it's kind of a lower powered deck. And I realize this may be a bit of a hot take and understand this does not align with 99% of play groups, but I'd say maybe give it a try sometime. And if you feel like this deck list lacks, board wipes or something that you're looking out, just take out some of the targeted removal and put in some board wipes of your choice. Obviously, Farewell is one of the best ones to run right now because it exiles everything and it's a fresh reset. And now let's get into the artifacts. We are running Conduit of Worlds, Crucible of Worlds, and Skull Clamp. Very simple artifact package. We do not need mana rocks. We're going to be ramping so much. We do not need them. And yes, I mean Soul Ring. We don't need Soul Ring. If I am playing green decks, I do not run Soul Ring. And it's not because I think the card's overpowered or needs to be banned or anything like that. It's just my personal preference. I would rather run a ramp card instead of a Soul Ring. So for this deck, I've omitted pretty much any mana rock you could possibly use. But you have Crucible of Worlds and Conduit of Worlds as a backup to Ramanap Excavator. Between those three cards, you're going to be able to play so many things out of your graveyard. Rounding it out, you got Skull Clamp for card draw and Dredge support. So if you're, sitting there Skull Clamping your little plant tokens or something's about to die, you can dredge, you can draw, whatever works in that moment. It's a great card for this deck. And let's get into the enchantments. We are running a Johnny's Welcome, Druid class, Exploration, Felidar Retreat, Hunting Grounds, Insidious Roots, and Spelunking. Now, our enchantments help with the life gain sub-theme a little bit, and also being able to play multiple lands a turn. Druid class allows for multiple land drops while gaining us life as well, so double whammy there. Felidar Retreat gives us a little bit of token regeneration along with pumping our creatures. That +1/+1 in Vigilance can save you more often than you think. Hunting Grounds gives us the ability to possibly play free creatures if our graveyard is full enough, and just a hint, it usually is. And in my opinion, the MVP of this deck is Spelunking. This card is so good. It lets you have all of your lands come in untapped. The cave thing doesn't even matter. If you want to run a cave, by all means do it because you'll gain 4 life. Again, it plays into the life gains sub-theme as well. So it lets you put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, and if it was a cave, you gain 4 life. Lands you control enter the battlefield untapped, and that does include your shock lands. You can shock them in for free. It's incredible. This card's so good. I pretty much run it in every single... I have multiple tap lands. It's Spelunking and it's in green. This is in there. It's such a good card. And so rounding it out, let's talk about our land package. This is the biggest piece of the deck. It's the linchpin. It's a landfall deck, so that's a given. Obviously, we want to achieve as many land drops as possible, but we only run 5 fetch lands. But with the repeatable dredge and being able to play lands from the graveyard, we will get to crack them more than 5 times, guaranteed. Now there's a ton of utility lands in the deck, with Field of the Dead and Glacial Chasm being our 2 most important. We can fetch those multiple ways with either Urza's Cave or Sylvan Scrying or Crop Rotation. We run all the on-color shocks, and even more important are the new Surveil lands. They are critical to filling the graveyard and for dredge purposes. They are such good lands for this deck. It's like they were made for this deck. So overall, we have 38 lands in the deck. We are running Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, Boseiju, who's indoors, which is removal on a land, a command tower, a Dakmor Salvage to help with more dredge. We put in the Dark Depths Thespian Stage combo, Deceptive Landscape, Fabled Passage, Field of the Dead, 4 basic forests, Glacial Chasm, a Golgari Rot Farm for a combo that we'll talk about later, the Endatha Triome, Marsh Flats, 4 basic plains, a snow-covered forest, a snow-covered plains, and a snow-covered swamp to help with the 7 different land names, 4 basic swamps, Takanuma Abandoned Mire to either get the named land, or if you need to mill cards, it's perfect for that. Verdant Catacombs, and Windswept Heath. So, there are combos in this deck, and, well, let's get into a couple of them. The first up is being the classic, Gitrog monster. With Gitrog out, along with Crucible of Worlds or Ramanapa Excavator and the land Glacial Chasm on the field, you can achieve the following combo. First, you're going to play Glacial Chasm either from your hand or from your graveyard. Now, when it enters the battlefield, its second ability triggers, causing you to sacrifice another land you control. Then you will play any land from your graveyard. At the beginning of your next upkeep, Glacial Chasm's cumulative upkeep ability triggers, allowing you to choose not to pay the cost and sacrifice it instead. And then you will just repeat that. And it basically prevents all damage that would be dealt to you. In fact, Glacial Chasm combos with a myriad of other pieces in this deck and is arguably the second most important land in the deck. I put Field of the Dead above it because, well, you just want to be making more zombies. It also combos with the Ramanap Crucible and Druid class, or also Exploration, Ramanap, and Crucible. Now, the other big game-winning combo around this deck is Kodama the East Tree with Field of the Dead and Golgari Rot Farm. And so how this works is you will play the Golgari Rot Farm. Field of the Dead, Kodama the East Tree, and Golgari Rot Farm all trigger. You're going to resolve Kodama of the East Tree trigger, not putting anything onto the battlefield from your hand. You will resolve Golgari Rot Farm trigger, returning it to your hand. You will then resolve Field of the Dead trigger, creating a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Then Kodama the East Tree triggers, putting Golgari Rot Farm onto the battlefield from your hand. Field of the Dead and Golgari Rot Farm trigger. Go back to step 4 and repeat. So that gives you infinite creature tokens, infinite ETB, and infinite landfall triggers. So you can build the board, hope nobody has a board wipe, and swing in for lethal. Those are the two main combo win cons in this deck, but like I mentioned, there are various other ways to really outvalue your opponents with sheer tokens or life gain in this deck. And also, like I mentioned, Eerie Ultimatum. This deck is pretty resilient, like I said, but it is sort of a glass cannon in that respect. It's kind of hard to rebuild after a board wipe unless you have some very specific cards in hand, like Escape Shift or Splendid Reclamation. And like I said, the added aspect of not playing board wipes leaves the deck open to really aggro and more control strategies. Obviously, the biggest silver bullet to this deck is Graveyard Hate. If you have people playing Graveyard Hate, this deck is not going to do anything. You might as well scoop and play another game, because it shuts the deck off. That's any graveyard deck, but that is obviously the big silver bullet here that we need to discuss. If anybody's playing Graveyard Hate, you need to get rid of it immediately. It's got to go. But with the thing with board wipes, again, that's just my personal playstyle, and feel free to add or remove what you see fit. This is just a general guide of how I've built the deck and enjoyed playing the deck myself, and that's why I wanted to share the deck tech. Also, like I mentioned earlier, for more budget-minded players, there are ways to make the mana base less expensive by running some Snow Duels or the duels from Dominaria United as alternatives to the other Shocklands and stuff like that. You do still need some fetches to kind of make the deck more cohesive and to make sure you're hitting your colors, but you can also add other budget-friendly options like Terramorphic Expanse and, of course, Evolving Wilds to that list. So that right there is the deck tech on Necrobloom. Super fun deck, one of my favorite new commanders to come out this year. I had a blast playing it. I mean, it can do some crazy, crazy stuff if you can just get the right pieces, and you will become archenemy at some point because your board is just going to be so massive. But it's a great, fun deck. It's a little slow going. It takes at least 7 turns to really get it going. But that's kind of the fun, have it go a little bit, longer of a game. Super fun commander, super fun deck. Thanks so much for checking this out. If you have a commander you would like me to deck tech or want to see how I would build it, leave it in the comments and, I'll add it to the list. Thank you so much. I'm Wildcard MTG.